One of the first successful non-rigid airships was launched in 1901 by Santos Dumont. The natives of Paris were astonished as he wheeled the cigar-shaped vehicle through the streets. At this early date, he proved to them that a floating ship could be steered as it hovered over the roofs of Paris. On one of his intrepid flights, Dumont landed in his own backyard where coffee was served before he continued his aerial adventures. A year later, Laborde left the ground in the first semi-rigid airship. Under the envelope which held the lifting gas, he had hooked on a keel. The Republic of France accepted it for military purposes. This was the first time a nation had acquired an airship. Meanwhile, Count Zeppelin started building completely rigid airships for Germany in the early 1900s. The Zeppelin line achieved a remarkable record. Up to the war, it transported 34,000 passengers without a single accident. The good citizens of Pittsfield, Massachusetts were fascinated by the appearance of a free balloon. They were still using horse cars and bicycles when this gas-filled bag left the ground. And as they watched its ascent, little did they know that later that same day, San Francisco would be destroyed by an earthquake. Nor could they foresee as they watched this sportsman's toy that during their lifetimes, lighter-than aircraft would become a practical means of transportation. In 1907, out-of-door entertainment meant lunch to Americans. Movies were not well known. We had no radios. We enjoyed watching the antics of this explorer of the air in a balloon that actually steered. Control and direction were two essentials to be embodied in airships of the future. In the same year, America achieved a near monopoly of helium when we discovered new fields in Texas and other oil territories. Hardly any other development has meant so much to lighter-than-air transportation. The C-7 was the first blimp to take advantage of this inert gas, which eliminates the fire hazard in lighter-than-air craft. The availability of helium was one of the incentives to the Army Air Corps. They developed the RS-1, the largest American semi-rigid airship. The gas envelope is spread over the floor in the airship dock before it is inflated with helium gas. While the envelope is lifted by the gas, it is tied down by netting until it reaches its final shape so that the keel can be attached to it. The Army's TC-13 is almost half the size of the RS-1. It represents the latest refinements in design of non-rigid airships, even including accessories carried by the huge rigid ships. In coastal patrol, this type of blimp can render important services. One of the major necessities in modern naval warfare is a detailed knowledge of the location and strength of the enemy forces. The airship, therefore, is a valuable adjunct to the fleet. It can patrol larger areas. It is much faster than a surface scout cruiser. From its elevated position, it can observe more territory, cover more distance, see more accurately. The use of gliders as trailers on airships presents an interesting possibility. By way of experiment, 4 planes without engines are towed by an airship. It is possible to release the gliders at will by means of releasing hooks. The Army has considered the use of glider trains for the delivery of mail to cities located along a planned route. Many military airships, including the rigids, have been equipped with a sub-cloud car. Barely large enough for a single observer, this car, only the size of a tiny airplane fuselage, is lowered below the clouds while the airship remains hidden above. The car is equipped with a telephone. The observer is able to communicate with the ship, direct its course, sight bombs, or make maps. With this device, the airship can function without being seen from below. Because of the ability of the airship to reduce its speed and even to hover over a given spot, it is well suited for the pickup and delivery of goods. It can do this without landing. A demonstration in proof of this was staged over New York City. A blimp picked up Europe-bound mail from the tower of the Empire State Building. The ship for which the mail was intended had already set sail. After taking the mail on board, the blimp headed directly for the Atlantic coast. And here we see it catching up with a fast steamship already 6 hours at sea. Without difficulty, it delivers its cargo of mail. The practicability of this experiment is obvious. The airship can take off and land almost vertically under the lift of its gas. It does not necessarily depend on a smooth landing surface. 2 aviators were forced down in the treacherous Everglades of Florida. A blimp came to the rescue, made a safe landing in the swamp without a landing crew, and returned the flyers to safety. Agriculture has found vital uses for the airship, which can fly low and slow. In the Middle West, chemical compounds are sprayed to prevent the spread of plant disease. In other parts of the country, lighter-than aircraft are employed to patrol government reserves and to report forest fires. Although the balloon is the oldest form of aerial transportation, it still has important scientific uses. Lieutenant Commander Settle's ascents into the stratosphere established new altitude records of approximately 15,000 feet greater than that of the airplane. In aerial exploration, lighter-than aircraft have the ability to reach greater heights. They can also safely traverse long distances without refueling. Under the command of able naval officers like Rosendahl, the Los Angeles served long and well. Convoying the rigid Los Angeles are non-rigid blimps. In the rigid type, you get the full power of lighter-than aircraft. Instead of one gas bag used in the non-rigid ship, the lifting gas of the rigid ship is contained in separate compartments. Damage to one cell and the consequent loss of gas is therefore not a problem with a rigid airship, whose comparative size is impressive in this air parade. The Los Angeles made her first American appearance after her historic flight over the Atlantic. 10 years ago, she was marveled at because of her impressive dimensions. Today, she is only about 1/3 the size of Germany's new transatlantic airship. At one time, mooring of airships could not be effected without use of a dock. Thanks to the efforts of the Navy, we have in the short mast an adaptable unit which ensures mooring under the most difficult conditions. When the Los Angeles flew to the canal zone, it used the Patoka, stationed at Puerto Rico, as a base. Huge rings made of light alloys of high tensile strength give the airship structure inner stiffness. They are constructed in horizontal position near the floor. This diagram shows first auxiliary erection frames which lift the rings into position. In the case of the Macon, these rings are as high as a 14-story building. While the erection gear is holding the rings in final position, the connecting girders made of the same light but powerful alloys are inserted from movable platforms. The square panels formed by rings and connecting girders are braced by a system of diagonal wires. This constitutes the basic structure of the rigid airship. In 1931, construction of the Mekong started in Akron, Ohio. It was a vast undertaking. All the knowledge of decades of accumulated experience were transformed in her design. She was the product of years of research and the result of great engineering genius. The American Navy and the aircraft industry joined forces in this impressive undertaking. To build the Macon-type ship, a gigantic dock was constructed. The floor area is 8 acres, big enough to cover a complete farm. The Mekong was a large-scale venture, but its bigness is not without reason. In aeronautics, cruising range is dependent on gas content or lifting ability. And until the recent completion of the new German transatlantic airliner, the Macon had the largest gas content of any ship. It is built not only to fly fast, but to fly far. It can go as fast as 85 miles an hour, and at cruising speed it has a non-stop range of about 9,000 miles. The erection of a huge structure of these dimensions raised many new problems. One of them was the construction of bow and stern. The solution of this problem was the building of the stern and bow as separate and complete units. They were then raised and attached to the frame of the ship. For the first time in airship construction, the fin, actually as big as a house and lot, was fully erected and completed on the floor, then hoisted into position. The Macon was launched in the spring of 1933, and after exhaustive tests accepted by the Navy later that year. She has a top speed of 85 miles an hour, and at cruising speed a non-stop range of about 9,000 miles. The same care that went into her construction was exercised in the selection of her personnel. A crew, complete as that of a seagoing dreadnought, was assigned to man her. The captain is in supreme charge of ships like the Macon. He remains in the bridge or control car while the ship is in flight. Sailors patrol the decks and catwalks at regular intervals for purposes of inspection. Special officers in charge of navigation, radio, and meteorology are on duty on the bridge under supervision of the captain or the executive officer. In the galley, meals are prepared for 100 officers and men. The Macon is complete in every detail, even to comfortable eating and living quarters for its personnel. Giant air cruisers like the Macon carry a fleet of fighting or scout planes. And when these planes are released, they can observe a range of 200 miles on each side of the airship. In other words, an airship with its planes can observe a path 400 miles wide as it progresses through the air. The Navy has perfected ingenious equipment and perfect technique for the rapid launching and recapturing of its airplanes. In the development of mooring equipment, the Navy made use of an important mechanical principle for the connection proper. They rigged the bow of the Macon with a cone designed to fit into a funnel-shaped masthead. The guidance is ensured by a cable arrangement. This represents the utmost degree of perfection and safety in anchoring an airship. The Los Angeles and the Macon are the vanguard of the Navy, to whom we owe much for the development of the airship. Lighter-than aircraft was slower in developing commercially than the airplane transportation. 30 years of pioneering in lighter-than aircraft are but as a day in the history of aviation. As Charles Gray once said, airplanes breed like rabbits, airships like elephants. But no one looking from a long-range viewpoint can fail to realize the international significance of the airship. The career of the Graf Zeppelin foreshadows the future of lighter-than aircraft. Year in and year out, it has flown a regular transatlantic schedule, and these figures tell its story. Up to 1934, it flew 460,000 miles, carrying 8,900 passengers, or 23,000 persons, including the crews. Paralleling this record, blimps in the Goodyear fleet have flown 1.5 million miles, carrying 133,000 passengers without injury. The Graf Zeppelin and other airships are not in competition with airplanes. Each have their useful function. The airplane is a higher speed flying craft, adapted to frequent shorter trips carrying smaller cargo. The airship is slower, carrying larger loads on longer routes in less frequent intervals. The Graf arrived in Lakehurst from Germany, and from there started on its return journey as the first leg of a world flight. It carried passengers, express, and mail. The docking of the airship is a spectacular sight. Let us watch it. tractors are used in docking the airship. It comes into port much like an ocean liner swinging up to its pier. Passengers descend from a gangplank in much the same manner as incoming steamship voyagers. Under Dr. Eckner's command, the Graf circled the globe in 1929. Since then, it has crossed the Atlantic on the South American run with timetable regularity. The Graf Zeppelin makes more than 10 round trips between Germany and Brazil every year, with a complete absence of ballyhoo and a business-like succession of arrivals and departures. The schedules, prepared months in advance, are carried out like clockwork. Comfort on a modern commercial airship is comparable to hotel luxury. Unlike the airplane, there is plenty of room to move about, and seasickness is unknown in these steady-riding air palaces. This is a blueprint of the passenger quarters of a contemplated commercial airship. The staterooms are large and airy and kept free from food and fuel odors. The spacious dining and lounge rooms will accommodate at least 50 passengers. The promenade deck is wide enough for deck chairs, and because helium gas is not inflammable, smoking will be permitted in the club and observation rooms. The observation room will be located outside the ship's hull next to the control car, giving an unobstructed panoramic view. The 1929 round-the-world trip of the Graf Zeppelin consumed 21 days. From Lakehurst, the ship flew across the Atlantic to Germany in 2 days and 7 hours. Flying over Europe and Asia for 4 days and 6 hours, Tokyo was reached as the second stopover. Spanning the Pacific from Tokyo to Los Angeles was a matter of 3 days and 7 hours. The Graf completed the last leg of this flight by crossing the United States in 2 days and 4 hours. As the Graf passed over Egypt and the Far East on one of its many flights, the world realized that airship journeys were no mere stunt. Safety was never sacrificed for speed. Over many lands, under all kinds of weather conditions, the Zeppelin accumulated experience and data with which future schedules and routes were planned. The Graf is no stranger to America. At various times and in various trips, she has crossed the skylines of many a big city. We have come to know that she is not dependent on any one engine, and that even if all her engines failed, she could still stay aloft under the lifting power of the buoyant gas. The return to Lakehurst marked the successful completion of her round-the-world flight, which antiquated the dream of Jules Verne. In a possible round-the-world service, the airship and the airplane cooperate together to form a fast, dependable service of only 13 days. Washington to Paris by airship in 51 hours. By fast airplane from Paris to Barcelona, a distance of 456 miles in 4 hours. By airship from Barcelona to Karachi, a distance of 3,326 miles in 51 hours. Continuing by airship from Karachi to Batavia, a distance of 2,975 miles in 46 hours. From Batavia, a fast airplane will continue over islands offering emergency landing facilities to Manila in 12 hours. By airship from Manila to Tokyo in 25 hours. Then again by airship across the ocean from Tokyo to Honolulu, a distance of 3,403 miles in 52 hours. Proceeding further from Honolulu to Los Angeles by airship, 2,228 miles in 34 hours. Modern and fast airplane service will complete the journey to Washington in 16 hours, a distance of 2,116 miles. airships and airplanes have separate and distinct uses. Non-stop flying or operating range of a flying boat as being equal to 3,000 units, which may be 3,000 miles. The corresponding range of an airship would be 13,000 units. The total useful load of any aircraft is made up of fuel and passengers and freight. Passengers and freight equal payload. Commercially speaking, its own weight and the weight of its crew are not a part of its useful load. Its payload is its only source of revenue, but this has an important relationship to flying range. The airplane can fly only a non-stop distance of 16 units, as against the airship's 200 units. Now, assuming that the maximum non-stop distance of a flying boat is 2,500 miles, the amount of fuel required to make the flight is so great as to take up most of its capacity. This necessitates its carrying a minimum amount of payload over the distance. These graphs show that even at 6,000 miles, the airship can still carry a substantial payload. The cost per 10 miles goes up rapidly in the case of the flying boat, since the same expense has to be charged to a smaller payload. The airship cost, analyzed in the same way, is much lower. Even if commercial airplanes are developed to safely fly the oceans, they will be extremely expensive to operate, and the airship will still be able to offer much cheaper freight rates. The field for the large, rigid airship is clearly marked out. No competition exists, nor can it exist, as long as airplanes and airships each have their well-defined uses. Beyond the material advantages of the airship, there are values which cannot be measured in dollars and cents. There is no measuring stick for prestige and international goodwill. The time is not distant when the dream of worldwide air transportation will become a reality. And in the years to come, American airships will fly beyond the horizons of today as magnificent symbols of peace and commerce.